Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Tastemakers podcast here on We Know Scripted TV. We have, of course, the podcast where we talk about what's coming up, what's been on the TV, what's been off the TV, what's been on the screens of the theaters, and how you can consume it in your mouth. I'm your host, Taran Armstrong, and with me, as always, it's Grace Leeder. How you doing, Grace?
I was doing great until you said consume it in my mouth. I was doing so well up until
That's
that point,
how
and then you got me.
that's how we
Mhm.
do it.
I like to say that we're like a fine wine, like wine tasting, where you
Mm.
you drink and then you spit it. Do you spit it out? Is that wine? Am I remembering correctly?
I think so, because otherwise you'd get drunk tasting all
Yeah.
the wine, right?
There was a really good wine moment on the White Lotus. I think in episode 1 where she's like, "I would like more." And it's like, that's to taste it to see if you like the bottle. Which would you ever return a bottle of wine, Taryn? Have you ever? I don't think
I
I've ever been to a fancy enough restaurant where they're like, "Do you want this wine or not?"
I don't drink at all, so I wouldn't
Okay,
even.
fair enough. Even better
Yeah.
response. Yeah. Okay, well,
Usually, if people give me a bottle of alcohol, I go thank you, and then I put it somewhere, and then it stays there forever.
imagine we could do that with TV where we're like, we try a little bit and we're like, actually, no, you can return it to the shelf. We don't need any more. Oh.
Yeah, I mean that's pilot season, right?
They don't really do pilot season
They don't
anymore.
really do it
I
anymore.
know. That's yeah.
I remember a time way back in the day. I think it might have been Amazon when Amazon first started doing Amazon Prime. They had like a pilot day,
Oh yeah. I
and
remember
they
that.
released a bunch of just one episodes of things, and I don't think
Yeah.
any of them took off.
No.
But
Do you
I
know why
remember
they don't?
watching a bunch of them.
Do you know why they don't do pilot day anymore? Too much. There was too much DEI going on in the pilot day. They're like, I think that's the best joke I've ever made. All these pilots got too much. They're too woke, Taryn.
All right. Well, plenty to talk about today.
Yes.
There's lots of news to talk about. That I found interesting. I checked out all of the new shows that we talked about last week, so I can give some updates on those. And then I've also got some more stuff to catch up on as well that I watched.
Can I say, Taryn, right now? Can I say right now? There's a lot of TV, both on TV and coming to
Yes.
television, that I feel like I'm feeling in particular like this. There's so much for us to watch, which is great. It's great, but then I'm also like, I joked about this before. I think we need a tastemaker for I think it's each other of like each other being like, yeah, I watch that. It's not, it's fine. You don't have to watch more of it or whatever. But there's a lot of TV coming that I'm like, both that's on right now that's very good and worth keeping up with, and then television that's coming that I'm extremely excited about. So
we are
busy
truly
season.
entering the busy season. This is I think that this podcast kind of serves different functions in different periods of the year.
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
like when there's not as much, it's like what are the gems out there to
Yes.
like watch? And when we're getting into this period of time now where it's like, okay, a lot of really good stuff and a lot of stuff in general. So we have to really sift through and figure out what's worth paying attention to here. And I think that is definitely where we are approaching. And I think it's very relevant to this week's releases as well.
And it's funny because I keep coming on being like, oh man, I didn't watch as much as I wanted to. And I'll like look at what I watched. I'm like, well, I did watch like The White Lotus and Severance, and I watched 4 movies in theaters and this thing and this thing. I'm like, but I'm so behind. Not really, but for the purpose of what we're trying to provide the audience, sometimes there's a lot.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, let's talk through some of the pieces of news here. Let's see. I want to start with this one actually, because this is a personally very exciting one for me. There was some news about an upcoming show on Apple TV called Murderbot.
Murderbot. This is it's such a good name for a show. This is the best name for a show I've ever heard.
So this is actually a show based on a series of novels that I actually am a big fan of. Surprise, surprise. So sci-fi novels. They started out as like novellas, little like short stories. and eventually grew into full form novels. I will say personally, I preferred them as short stories. And once they went into the full on novels, it kind of started to lose me. But they're very, very fun. The premise is that there is a main character, the murder bot, who is basically just like a security bot who goes on missions and protects the humans. And it has a very dry sense of humor. There's a lot of internal monologues, so it's very interesting to see. It will be very interesting to see how they interpret that in the show. But it's basically just like a massively introverted robot that just wants to spend all of its time watching soap operas on the flights to different missions, and then ends up getting involved in lots of plots and such. It's very fun. I think this could be very good. It could also be disastrous. Apple TV has a bit of a hit or miss record. It's usually never fully great. It's usually got some flaws, but it's also usually not like really awful and terrible. So I'm curious to see where it goes. But it will be premiering May 16th, so not too far away here for Murderbot.
Well, the headline for me is that it's Alexander Skarsgård, who I
yes.
absolutely adore and love, and him attaching his name to it, I think, to me, gives me some hope that it will be good. That doesn't mean everything he's been in has been amazing, but that's it also has David Dasmalchian, who people might know from Late Night with the Devil, the horror movie, sort of indie horror movie that came out last year. Some other people you might recognize, but not necessarily like big faces. I do feel like, in terms of like, Apple TV's reputation, I do feel like they do have this thing of being where, like, I feel like they take big swings, I think, is what I most appreciate about Apple TV. I feel like there's so many that were like, even when it doesn't work, I'm like, oh, but that was such an interesting idea for a television show. But I've definitely watched some clunkers from Apple TV. But when they hit Apple TV, and I think it's probably because they currently have a model of like kind of paying money for properties, and then it feels like they let those properties be created with from what it feels like and seems like, without their hands on it, as opposed to what it sounds like from other properties. Like, I think, like, you can, to me, does this make sense? It feels like there's sort of like, oh, that's a Netflix show, and then Netflix, you hear these things that like Netflix kind of has their hands in, being like, oh, you should do this here and have, an episode 4, there needs to be this thing because that's how people watch. Apple TV feels, it's probably not free of this influence, but it feels like it's free of this influence.
Well, I feel like Netflix used to be known for being very like hands off, like very free. And I think that's probably like the life cycle of these things, where it's like right now Apple is still in the phase of just dumping a bunch of money and letting people do what they want. I would imagine that the more time goes on and the more successful they are, they start reining it in and shitifying it, and
but I mean, if you look at the shows that have been successful, it does feel like those are like visions of those people, like Ted Lasso and Severance is very much like the Dan Erickson and Ben Stiller shit. Like, that's them and their vibe, and that's what it feels like. So I do feel like that's one of the things I like about seeing an Apple TV show that like feels like an exciting property, is like, oh, they could, if they really get to like do what they want to do, it could be fun. So Murderbot, I put in the, I'm cautiously optimistic about.
Just quickly, the big talking point here that I've seen a lot for Murderbot, specifically Alexander Skarsgård's involvement, is that there are some people disappointed with the casting, despite loving Alexander Skarsgård, primarily because Murderbot is sexless, and they were kind of hoping for a more androgynous sort of character or actor to play this role, which I definitely understand, although I am a big Alexander Skarsgård fan, and so I hope that it goes well regardless. But speaking of Apple TV and the success of specifically Severance, that was another piece of news I wanted to talk about. They released some headlines, some numbers, that Severance has now officially become the most watched series for Apple TV, beating out Ted Lasso, the previously most watched show. Which, if you recall, just a few years ago, Apple TV was the Ted Lasso service, right?
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and
Mhm.
Severance has overtaken Ted Lasso now, which is wild because Ted Lasso is basically like built in a lab to be appealing to like everyone. And Severance feels very specific, but it is really blown up, clearly.
So let me say one thing. This is so I actually think a more important metric than Severance being the most watched show on Apple TV, because that just means it's a show that people are watching on that platform. If you have that platform, you're going to watch. That to me doesn't say, like, it says something, but to me, my thing about Severance is like there was so much marketing. In fact, they did so much press around the show that to me felt like that is a little bit that they have to, because not as many people have Apple TV. And so Netflix does obviously do marketing, but they don't do as much because they don't need to. You'll just, you know, people go on Netflix in the same way that people used to like go and watch the guide channel to like wait for the show that they wanted to watch come out. Now you go to the Netflix platform, you go through. What's more interesting to me is that in the Nielsen ratings, Severance ranked very high. It was fourth, I think. And so you're going back, like this is when it premiered, I believe. The Nielsen ratings are little bit delayed. That to me is a much stronger indicator of just how well Severance is doing, that an Apple TV show can break through into those rankings. And that to me is a particularly good sign for Severance as a show. And on top of that, I think this season has been extremely good. So not only is it like being watched, it's also very good. Which like you worry a little bit about a show, especially Severance, that had a long break, a lot of rewriting, a lot of apparently like they filmed whole sections of stuff that they are not using in the show, went over budget. A lot of like reasons to be worried, and yet I think the quality of the show has been really, really strong. So
Well, it's interesting to me because I think a big topic that we've talked about, that has been talked about in this world, is the length between seasons, which has grown. It feels like it's years between seasons of a show, and it's something that a lot of people bemoan because it's a very frustrating thing. And yet, Severance, despite the lengthy period between its first season and its second season, is seeing more success in its second season than it had in its first season. And then you also look at Squid Game, which took a lengthy break, and you would have thought like that's maybe a mistake. It left the cultural zeitgeist. Also massive numbers for its returning season. And they had very different, I would say, first seasons, where Severance's first season, I think, was very under the radar. And its time away felt like time for people to discover the first season and get hyped for the second one. Whereas maybe if it comes right back, is it the same? I don't know. Maybe
you
is
heard
it
it here
bigger?
first. Give it 10 years before you release your next season. Give it some time to breathe.
It's just an interesting thing because
I
obviously I think we all want shows to come back faster. But I think specifically with Severance's case, like it might have actually helped to have taken some time away, specifically because of the kind of show it is and the way that it gathered its audience, where it was a little bit of a slow build, fantastic finale, and then had a bunch of great word of mouth over the next few years to be like, we gotta see what happens in season 2 of Severance. You gotta check out Severance. So I don't know.
there is, I think, something to that of like, okay, finally it has returned. And not only has it returned, but I would imagine too, there was a little bit of like the amount of press that they were probably able to do around the show was probably helped. Not just that season 1 was such a massive, and I say massive success, but I also want to acknowledge that like I've spoken to a few of the cast members, and they talk about season 1 being like every once in a while someone would be like, oh yeah, this show. And I felt like I was having that with people where, you and I probably get this a lot now, where people are like, oh, you talk about TV, what should I watch? And my like the answer that I always feel like I can give no matter who I'm talking to without knowing any of their interests is like Severance. I think you can watch Severance and it's tremendous and you'll like it and it's good. The cast members talk about that there does seem to, it feels different with the show having returned this time than it was when season 1 was airing. And that's likely because, as you said, like people didn't know that it was as good, and maybe people caught it towards the end and then it's had this sort of disappearance. But this to me feels quite different. And I don't think it's wrong to think that like having this long of a break probably means, now that it is coming back, it feels like a bit more of a spectacle because it's been so long. And then probably those opportunities opened up a little bit more to be like, yeah, you can have a star of Severance on Late Night with Seth Meyers every night of the week this week because like it's such a big deal, as opposed to like if you had them on a year ago or whatever, would you necessarily have them all back? I don't know. It is kind of interesting. I think probably this has been like a little too long, that more than I would like, but it's a very interesting theory, Taran, that
I think another key
enjoy.
point to it, though, I would imagine, my guess, it took the fact that it's, I think, it's like an all-timer season finale.
I agree.
I think specifically the finale being so good and making you so excited for season 2 is what allowed for the buildup to happen.
I agree.
Whereas, other kinds of season finales, House of the Dragon,
Did you
might
see that
not
they
have worked as
confirmed?
well.
Did you see that they were like, we're definitely going to do the battle in the first episode of the next season. Do not worry. Did you see that? They were like, please, everyone needs to know we know we messed up. Can I say also, like, there's a few things there. The season 1 of Severance was apparently supposed to be one more episode, and they cut it because they felt like episode 9 was the perfect finale. It was really interesting, which I think they're right. And also, I think this is a show that I think what's so good about the show, which is not something I would give to other shows, is actually when you think about it, just how little we actually know in terms of the things on that show. There are whole characters where because of the innie outie dynamic, you actually know nothing about their outside life, which is like, it's such a withholding of information that on a lot of other shows you'd get a lot more of, but actually creates this like it's just, I think it's just sort of like the perfect mix of a show where not only is it's like really good television, like Succession feels like this to me too, where they did pretty great cliffhangers, but there was kind of only like one mystery about that show, which is like who will take over, as opposed to Severance has like many different things that you can be like, talk to someone and we're having a completely different conversation about some mystery element of that show than I am with like another person who's interested in some other element of the show. There's just a lot going on in that show.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Apple TV and numbers, The Gorge is a movie that dropped on Apple TV. I think it dropped sometime last week, or
yeah.
maybe a couple weeks ago, perhaps.
Mhm.
Looks like, thank you for February 14th. So that, of course, it was Valentine's Day.
10
So
days
just
ago.
over a week.
We're right. Like, yeah, a week and a half. Yeah.
Yes. The Gorge drops on Apple TV and has become the biggest movie premiere ever on Apple TV. So Apple TV hitting their highest numbers ever with both Severance and The Gorge. I'm going to say, before I even saw this news, I watched The Gorge.
I watched a bit of The Gorge. And I don't know, it's fine. It's fine.
I was just on Apple TV. I saw Anya Taylor-Joy and Miles Teller, and I was like, sure.
And Sigourney Weaver. This is like a star-studded like this.
She's like, not on the poster, but yes,
I know. She doesn't show up too long into the movie.
Actually, her name is on the poster. There you go. I thought it'd be fun. I will say, despite having a premise that I thought was interesting, I really felt like it did almost nothing with it, and it was a very boring movie. I did not enjoy it.
I think it's completely fine. I don't think it's like particularly good. I think it's particularly like awful. Which maybe some people
really, to me, just
but
felt like going through the motions.
Yeah. Yeah, it's so the Apple TV and not releasing their movies in theaters thing. I do feel like there's Matt Bellany from The Town is a big believer that like you basically have to have a marketing push for your movie to feel important, and so much of releasing a movie in theaters requires a marketing push that obviously releasing just to your streamer doesn't. I did see a bit of marketing for The Gorge, like out in the world and YouTube ads or whatever. But for the most part, it's annoying because like this movie feels like it should be important because it is like two of the youngest up and coming movie stars, and yet just kind of like plopped onto Apple TV, and then maybe for the best because it's not amazing. So, but
I think mediocrity is kind of my word for the week, which is maybe spoiling the rest of my reviews of things I watched.
I think actually what you said before is a little bit of what I was saying. I was watching. I was like, oh, that's such a good idea, and then the idea goes nowhere. That's a little bit about how we're going to talk about another one where I feel like they don't execute on the idea well enough. So
Well, one thing I forgot to talk about last week, but also ties into ratings talk. Dexter Original Sin did wrap up its season.
Yep.
And we're a little bit behind on that because I forgot about it last week. But perhaps for the best, because now we have news on the ratings, and it did fantastic. Again, ratings are up. In fact, they said 30% up from the premiere of the season, which means that basically the audience grew over the course of the season, which is not typically how seasons, especially of an established show, would work. I think that what likely is happening there, a lot of skepticism about Dexter as a franchise, that Dexter Original Sin seems to have won trust back with its fan base, as people were hearing that it was actually pretty decent. Certainly weren't hearing that from us after the premiere, but but eventually we got there.
I keep meaning to watch more of this because I do like what I've seen. I think once you like sort of buy into it, it's very fun.
Mhm.
And I do think the other thing I sort of shared an anecdote a little while ago about it was this writer who worked for I think on the West End or in England, and was a writer and had been like had sort of a an okay successful musical, whatever, and then was offered to write Mrs. Doubtfire and did it. It became this massive huge hit for him, financially successful. And I keep thinking about it because it's like I don't know that we're like the idea that we like complain about franchise IP and that like there's no new ideas, like just even in what we're talking about, it's like The Gorge is a new idea. It wasn't that great. I don't know. Like, and I know we're talking about like they're two totally different things.
New.
I know, like new.
The
Yeah,
Gorge
I
to me
know.
felt like they just took like the most generic tropes,
I
mashed them together.
Agree. And, Severance is like one of the most unique and intellectual, like it's amazing. So yeah, there are new ideas, but also like get like a show like Dexter, like a lot of people watched it, and so like I can't really fault like studio producers for like at least like spending a bunch of their time on in being like, what is something that like people will watch because it has something attached to it, and in a day, and it's really easy to say like, oh, it's a Dexter show. Like it's not really surprising to me. Like we can. I just don't. I think more so whether or not I agree with it, I more so think it's not going away. And
Well, I think
yeah,
the thing about Dexter is that it is such an original premise
that's true.
that nobody else has come in to do the premise. And
Right.
so Dexter just lives in this niche and continues to just flourish as its own thing. Because like who else is doing that you're following a serial killer? And like, but it's also just like a cop trial. Like it's
Yeah.
still fairly unique. I mean, it certainly
But
rests on a lot of other tropes, but like it has this very unique spin to it.
you know what, the actual silver lining of the is like not so much like can you like it's because it was so popular when it was on, but they've really saved this thing in a way that like I think in the last years like this, and I feel like House of the Dragon season 1 sort of like
Mm.
redeeming the end of Game of Thrones to a degree. There is a little bit of that going on with this as well. That like the end of Dexter was so bad and people were very mad about the way that show ended, and the fact that they've like basically been able to like carve out like something that's like, savable here is pretty interesting, I think.
So I will say, having finished the season, I think that despite a rocky start for me, it did really come in strong. I, in fact, had some fairly strong moments. I would say this is probably better than some of the worst seasons of the original run of the
Whoa.
show.
Whoa.
But definitely for me wouldn't reach the highs of the previous run. Though there were some good moments. I think the ending was fine. And I think it worked. I gotta say, like Patrick Dempsey just never clicked for me
Too
in
bad.
the role that he had. It just never worked. But overall, I thought it was a very fun ride, and I ended it when I first reviewed the pilot. What I said was, all I want is just more Dexter. I like the premise is fine, and ultimately that's exactly what the show was. It just took me a second to sort of recognize that. So I would certainly recommend it if you're a Dexter fan. Okay. Speaking of though, more ratings talk, because I'm very interested in all of this. Shows that are growing their audiences. Yellowjackets. season 3, the season 3 premiere was the biggest premiere for the series yet. The
Do they
audience is
think
growing.
is that in the number? Do they say that that's okay? So here's where I'm gonna like, quibble a little bit, which is like, do they say
Mm.
that it's specifically for episode 1, or because they dropped 2 episodes, are they double dipping on people who?
Ooh.
So if you watched both episodes, do you get count as a double viewer? As like, I watched 2 episodes and in their first, you know what I mean? I would want to maybe parse the numbers on that a little bit. I'd be
Mhm.
interested to know how they reported that. Yeah. Anyway.
Let me just take a quick look here.
Because they dropped 2
Season
episodes on Valentine's
Yep.
Day as their first 2 episodes. It would not surprise me that this show did grow in viewership from season 1 to season 2. I do think that this, similar to Severance, it's a mystery box show. It's very fun to talk about. I feel like, Yellowjackets in season 3, there's a lot of stuff to, like, when Jess and I did a sort of preview pod and we were trying to find 5 mysteries heading into season 3. Actually felt like we could have done a lot more. We actually condensed many things into one. It has like name recognition. It's very, I don't know. The show is kind of really loved. So it wouldn't surprise me if it did grow, but I am just wondering if they like reported how they reported those
So
numbers.
what I'm seeing, the caveat that I'm seeing is primarily that that the thing to take note of is that the last time it had a premiere in season 2, it was only on
Well,
Showtime, and
right.
now
It's
it
on
has been
Paramount.
rolled into Paramount
That's
Plus,
that's
and
right as
so
well.
they have a much bigger subscriber base to work from. So that
Yeah.
is likely a
That's
big
that's way
cause.
more. I think that's
Yeah.
probably exactly it. That they have now merged into their. It's, I think technically still labeled as like it's a Showtime. It's a Showtime Paramount Plus production or something like that. But that makes a lot of sense. They're now on Paramount Plus. Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, I'm just rolling. Do you have any new? I've still got more, but
No,
I
you
want to
go
make
for it. I
sure.
like this. No, you roll. Yeah, you go.
Okay. Well, obviously, I think big news. I don't have a good IMDb page for it, but I'm sure everyone has heard of this. Surely, Amazon MGM has taken control of the James Bond series
Yeah.
franchise.
007. It astounds me that one of the TV characters or movie characters that has the coolest name in the world, James Bond, is owned by people with the last name Broccoli. It's a real name.
Yeah.
Nevertheless, James Bond. This is a thing I was hearing about. So the Broccolis are incredibly protective of the James Bond franchise. There was recently also a lawsuit, Taran, of somebody trying to claim that James Bond, he was going to be able to file for trademarks for James Bond stuff. I believe that this deal is entirely to make sure that they don't lose any sort of James Bond stuff for the and that they will then sort of continue it. This is one of the longest stretches we've ever gotten between James Bond films. I think we're not quite the longest, but coming up on it. And if you watch the last James Bond film, there's a very interesting reason, I think, in terms of not just that like Daniel Craig is done, but if you watch the movie, interesting thing in terms of like what are they going to do next. They tried the most that they like the one swing they've taken, Darren, was like the James Bond reality show that was hosted by Brian Cox. Do you recall this at all? It did not work at all. It was in fact not
I
good.
feel like I vaguely remember it. I don't think I ever watched it though.
He hosted, let me see if I can, it's like I can't remember the name of it's, I feel like it had 007 challenge, maybe. Is that, no, Road to a Million. 007 Road to a Million, hosted by Brian Cox, features 9 teams of 2 competing in a race to win £1 million in spy themed challenges. So yeah, this sale seems to be like, keep the rights. Let's like make sure that the rights are like held with somebody and let's start actually making some content. I'm most interested, Taran, in how much they do, because I do think if you think about a franchise like James Bond, the fact that they really only do James Bond movies is actually like quite surprising in terms of like franchise IP. Look at Dexter.
Mhm.
Okay. Dexter
Mhm.
had, they did Dexter. And then when that ended, they were like, okay, now we're going to do New Blood. And now we're doing Original Sin, and we're going to do Resurrection, right? That's like 4 properties they've had. James Bond, they just do James Bond movies for the most part. And I wonder whether they'll start to be an expanse into like, here's the Q TV show. Here's
Yeah.
this thing over here.
It's actually very funny because I've seen this discussion a lot, and it
Yeah.
didn't occur to me until just now how funny this is to me because growing up, for me at least, the James Bond franchise was an example of a franchise that had been milked.
Right. Right.
They were just pumping out James Bond movies every
Right.
few years to
Right.
the point where they were casting different actors to continue on the series after the original went away.
Yeah.
And now that Amazon has taken over, it is in the current landscape where like Marvel exists. James Bond is seen as a bastion of like restraint, of like, yeah, only one movie every couple of years is like we're keeping it,
Yeah.
quality over
Yeah.
quantity.
Yeah.
But that was not James Bond. That's not what James Bond used to be,
Yeah.
at
That's
least
funny.
when I was growing up
And
from in my perspective.
the games and everything.
Yeah,
Like
there
there
were
was a lot of
games,
fun
books,
stuff.
like
Well, the books is kind of like I think that somebody out there must be like, if we could let us do the same stuff with the movies that you do with the books, because the books but they have new, obviously, Ian Fleming, he's not alive, so they have other authors who are writing newer books. They have a Moneypenny series, like there's a spin-off, Moneypenny Diaries. Like they're doing a lot actually. Young Bond, I believe they've doing like a, yeah. So they do a lot in the books with the books that they don't do in like the media franchises.
Yeah, so obviously, like, there's a lot of skepticism about Amazon franchising the hell out of this, and yeah, like making a bunch of spin-off series and so on and so forth. And I definitely understand that skepticism. I think for me, I'm not as concerned. I have never been the biggest fan of like the broccoli sort of direction. I think that basically Bond makes one good movie every 10 years, is sort of my perspective. And also, they're watchable most of the time. But I'm kind of excited to see what can come of the franchise with different creative oversight. And a lot of big directors who have wanted to do Bond movies before and couldn't. Danny Boyle himself, one of my favorite directors, was in talks to do No Time to Die. They didn't like the direction that he went, and so he got axed from that project, or I think he left the project. So like with more potential creative freedom, weird to say that Amazon would allow for more creative freedom, but I don't know. Maybe there's more opportunity for really good Bond stuff to come out, even if the franchise gets diluted in the process. And for me, like, I'm not super attached to Bond, so I don't really care that much if it does. But if they occasionally come out with something really good, that's just all kind of good for me. So that's kind of my own personal take on it.
I'm most interested, honestly, just in who's going to be Bond. I mean, people should shout out who they. I mean, Aaron Taylor Johnson has been like the pick for like the last, basically since 2021 of like that's the next Bond. Doesn't I don't think that's true. So I'd be interested in who people think should be, or who they think will be the next James Bond. We'll see.
Who knows? I always just kind of in my head, I figured it was going to be Idris Elba, but I feel like it's too late now.
I also think I think that like if there's somebody who has been like famous enough and has been rumored to be them for long enough, I think that they're probably like now out of the running, which is kind of silly, but
Mm-hmm.
I think they'll go with someone a little bit less well known. But
All right. Well, another big piece of news. Listen, I'm telling you, this is a news
Mm.
podcast this week.
Mhm.
I'm super pumped about this one. An announcement was made that a new Avatar: The Last Airbender
Oh
sequel
yeah,
series is
yeah.
on the way from the original creators. This is in the proper timeline. This is going to be taking place after The Legend of Korra, with a new Avatar, and it will be, animated. It's not this live action stuff. This is like a proper sequel to the series, and this is great. Great news.
Yeah, this is one of the shows that I like. I have not watched the animated version of. It's just I feel overwhelmed by where to start, and just need to do it at some point because I know everybody who watches this thing loves it. I did really like the live action, and I did think the live act, and like I don't think it's like the most amazing thing I've ever seen, but I thought it was enjoyable for what it was, and I could see why people liked. Like it was one of those things where, much like One Piece, I was like, oh, this makes me want to watch the thing that everybody says is the better version of like it was good enough for that, I
Mm.
think. So I need to do that at some point. I have it. I know people are very excited about this news, especially sort of who's involved and what it actually is. So that's great.
Feels to me like because the original these creators, they were working on the live action, ended up leaving that process.
Right.
The show comes out to mixed reviews, but huge success. And I imagine that gives them a lot of like sort of motivation. They've been working in that world again, as well as like ammunition. Look how successful our franchise is to be able to get something like this made. So exciting stuff for Avatar: The Last Airbender. I say that because of unfortunately the movies are also Avatar, and so I don't.
Yeah.
There's also
Yeah.
news about the Avatar series and AI recently. So, okay, that's most of my news. There are a few dates that were dropped. The Last of Us, April 13th. So very close for The Last of Us season 2.
Very close. Yeah.
Andor,
Andor is that's April. Let me just
also
double
April.
check
I
that.
think it's 20 something.
Yeah, we'll tell you what day it is. It's coming. I don't see it. April 22nd.
There you go.
Yep. Mhm.
And Wheel of Time is coming up very shortly. That wasn't announced recently, but I don't think it was. But
March 13th is the Wheel of Time.
very much coming up soon. And I imagine that we will have some sort of coverage for the Wheel of Time for you if you're interested in that. And another thing that I thought was interesting, the show Jury Duty
Yeah.
was renewed for season 2.
Yeah, this was interesting. I saw the creator. Apparently, it's been filmed already.
Filmed already, which is smart because you don't want to announce a show like Jury Duty ahead of time. So basically, this was renewed a while ago. They filmed it, and then they announced it now that it's done filming. This is the show where it's sort of like Joe Schmo, where they pretended to have a documentary about jury duty, and then everyone was an actor except for this one guy who thought it was all real. And so they've done it again, this time not with jury duty. I don't remember exactly what it was, the premise.
It is a corporate retreat, apparently.
Right.
I believe, where like I presume that it's like, if you got sent by your work or so, like you could sign up for it and then they come and they're the only person. Everybody else is an actor. I do so I have a few thoughts of this. One, just candidly, I loved season 1. I thought season 1 was hilarious. Not much has made me laugh more than the guy who like had the like stool pants and like all of that stuff. Like I think it's like so funny. I think it's extremely good.
My favorite joke is still in the very first episode, and I'm pretty sure it was an improvised line. The improvised line in the first episode was still my favorite.
Okay. I've heard a little bit that like Ronald from the show like has developed a little bit of like trust issues, and so I do worry a little. There's like a piece of me that like, and I guess my caveat is like all reality TV, like if you're doing a show like this, you need to offer like extensive like therapy and like support for the person once they're out of the show. Like it's tough because like he's one of one. I mean, like there's the Joe Schmo people, but like in terms of this environment, he's one of one who's done it, and it's really tough to say. Like I don't know ethically. It's real. I watch a lot of stuff where I'm like, like the curse was, or not the curse, the rehearsal, which that's coming back. I still have like extreme ethical questions about whether that show should exist, and yet I think the show is brilliant and so captivating. So just flag all that.
Well,
yeah.
Just to quickly speak on that, Jury Duty, you can even see it in the IMDb rating, I think is a lot more respected as a show. It's sort of like the higher class version of the Joe Schmo show. And yet I would say those ethical issues are a little heightened in a show like Jury Duty. Because if you're going on the Joe Schmo show, you're going on
reality
TV, reality show that you're there for like a week or whatever, and like everything's wacky and goofy, and there's like an expectation that things are you're gonna be messed with, and so on and so forth. Whereas this was proposed as like a documentary about jury duty. Like it was a bit more ostensibly serious, even though it gets very goofy.
like I'm one of the things that like I so I ran summer camp for a long time, and one of the things that first came in and people got so mad at me is I like eliminated prank culture at the camp I worked at. And fundamentally, like pranks, you literally can't consent to being like, you guess you can
Mhm.
say like, yes, you can prank me, but there's always a moment where like you actually are violating whether or not
Yeah.
you like, you can't actually get consent for it. So it's tricky. Like Impractical Jokers is a show that I actually really love. And part of the thing that I've like figured out, like, why do I like that more than others? And I don't love every moment I've seen on that show, but they often design those so that the person who's doing it is like the cast member of the show is the one who engage and is the butt of the joke and
The
has to
joke is
do the thing.
on themselves. Yeah.
Yes, whereas
The joke is put them in uncomfortable positions.
and I do think that's one thing that like this show that like I worry about, like even like, you know, to go back and watch Joe Schmo, any of those seasons where like the one thing I do think it's like they have to do is like I hope that they've really I feel like they do in season one. I just haven't rewatched it recently. Is like protect Ronald in terms of finding the right person who is portrayed. But I imagine that's still tough that like he thought he was being bros with you know, and he might still be bros with James Marsden, but it's hard to not feel like to know whether that like how much of that is ever real and how much of it was on the show. That might be tricky. So you know,
Mhm.
I'm generally not I really don't like pranks generally, but you know, I did find the show very entertaining and very good. So I'm like, I struggle with like, should I ethically watch this show? I don't know. Yeah.
All right. Well, that's it. That's all my news.
I don't have any other news. I know that you covered all the news.
Okay.
SAG happened last night. I don't
SAG
have
stuff.
much.
Yes. Forgot about
Jane
that.
Fonda made. There's some like viral moments. Jane Fonda's speech, I think went viral. Kieran Culkin's acceptance speech went a little viral.
I saw some stuff about Timothy's speech saying he
Tim,
strives for greatness.
yeah, he was being like a little like, I know you're not supposed to say you want to be great, but I really want to be great, and I want to be as
I've seen a
good.
lot of
Yeah.
like people on both sides. Oh, that's arrogant. Oh, I like it.
Eh,
I don't
I'm
know.
kind of I like Timmy, so I might be biased, but I'm like, I don't know, go for it. I get what he's saying. Like he's acknowledging that it's weird, but then it's also weird that we don't say like, you have to like pretend like you don't deserve it or whatever. You know, that's
Sometimes
how
you don't
exactly
say
he's saying.
things for a reason. And
That's
sometimes you don't.
true. That's true.
Sometimes you don't say things for a reason. So,
That's
you
true.
know,
I
it's always
haven't
a
watched the
judgment call.
award show. It seemed like a couple moments seemed like hosting stuff was pretty well received. Seems like overall a pretty fine
Well,
show. I don't think it says much about who's Demi Moore winning. I feel like only like cements her as the front runner. Timmy winning is interesting. Maybe makes a more exciting race between him and Adrian Brody. And then I do think Conclave winning is interesting in the sense that like I still don't think it's like the front runner, but I think Conclave has this like sneaky little chance in a ranked ballot system to like find its way in there. So I don't
I've
know.
seen a lot of talk about how this is sort of further evidence that heading into the Oscars, things are really up in the air. Unlike most years where like all these other awards are really cementing things, the fact that Amelia Perez and The Brutalist were two of the heavy frontrunners for a while, both hit with some controversy
Yeah.
between the AI stuff with The Brutalist, which, you know, has been then said like was a little overblown, but still definitely a bit of a stain. And we see here that Adrian Brody does not win for Best Actor at the SAG Awards. And then obviously the massive amounts of controversy for Amelia Perez really opens the field for a lot of things potentially happening at the Oscars themselves. The other thing I thought was interesting was, and I didn't watch this, but the SAG Awards were advertised to me on Netflix a lot. Like, hey,
Yeah.
watch this live on Netflix.
Yeah, this is the second year they've been. I think second year they've been on Netflix, and I think that's a good. I think it's a good spot for that. I think like
This
there's
is the
certainly like
most I've ever heard about the SAG
that's
Awards.
exactly what I'm
And I think
saying.
it's
Is that
because it's on Netflix.
yeah, I do think Netflix could be priming itself for like a shot at something else, like Golden Globes or something like that. I feel like Golden Globes and Netflix actually makes a lot of sense, but
Mhm.
we'll see. We'll see.
All right. Well, let's talk about some of the shows that aired this week. One of the biggest ones we were going to talk about from last week, Zero Day, starring Robert De Niro. I think his first real stint in television. I mean, just massively huge cast. Jesse Plemons, Lizzie Kaplan, Connie Britton, Dan Stevens. It just the list goes on. You can't go a scene without recognizing like a new famous person in this show. And so, you know, there was a lot of hype I was like, okay, I feel like, you know, there's a lot of good stuff, a lot of good feelings coming into this. I have watched 2 episodes of Zero Day. I watched the first one and I was like, ooh, I was a little underwhelmed, but it ended in a weird way. So I was like, okay, I'll watch one more. But the second one was even worse. Did not really care for Zero Day. I thought this was very, very bland. I don't know. What did you
Yeah,
think, Grace?
no, I feel pretty similarly. I think that so the premise of the show is that Robert De Niro plays the former president of the United States, who seemingly left office with immense goodwill, which seems like the most unrealistic thing to ever happen in the history of
Right.
television. But he does leave, and so he's like kind of this like admired guy. And there's this moment, this like thing that America is under the attack of a cyber attack that happens like very briefly, but it's like it'd be super important. Something bad happens, and he's sort of like called back into like, you know, oversee, the process in which the country will get through this moment. I thought for a show that's supposed to like feel this big, it feels extremely small. So there's a moment where um there's like uh, protesters outside of a building, and they've like knocked down a barricade, and it's supposed to be this moment where it's supposed to show like, look how incredible this man is at like diffusing this. Look at what a natural leader he is. And I felt like the scene was like felt so small and so silly, and like, and they were like, and that's why he must lead the country through our the crisis of our time. Like that, the one that like, can we put this barricade back up? Like it's about very silly. And then there's another thing about the show, which like the cliffhanger at the end of episode 1, I I think kind of like, I don't know, the premise of the show is interesting enough that you don't need this extra thing they're doing at the end, which I'm like hesitant to spoil, but it's like fully the premise, I think, of the show. So I'll leave it. I don't think we needed that thing too, and
Yeah.
so all in all, I think it's like kind of like we we're saying about the gorge. I think it's like there's a good enough premise in here that just kind of like is not working for me. So I don't know that I'm gonna watch very much more, if any more, of
I'm personally
Zero
definitely
Day.
done with it. I barely got through the second episode, um, which is not to say that it's like actively bad. It's just aggressively mediocre in my eyes, which is hard to do when you have such a star-studded cast, and that's probably its biggest saving grace. I mean, if this was a cast of like people you didn't recognize, I don't think anybody would even know the show existed. But yeah, the scope is so weird. The incident itself felt very small to me as well. Like this massive thing that is supposed to like cause all of these ripple effects. In fact, it's what the show is named after. Every single scene is like 0 day plus 3 0, and it's just like I watched the thing happen and I didn't feel anything about it. And it also heavily relies on news segments to like be like, hey, this
Wolf
is what
Blitzer. Wolf
the
Blitzer in the
people are
show.
saying. And it's just like, oh, it's yeah.
Yeah, I
Anyway,
didn't care. I didn't care for it much, which is unfortunate because I think Lizzie Kaplan and then Jesse Plemons for sure. I want to just be like, I want to watch that thing you do. I mean, Angela Bassett's in the show, Connie Britton's in the show, Bill Camp, who I loved, and Presumed Innocent, is in the show, and I'm just like, I don't know. Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
All right. I also checked out Suits LA.
I've heard some rumors about how people feel about Suits LA. I won't steal.
Also,
It's being recapped here on the We Know Scripted TV network by, of course, who else but Rob Cesternino and Chappelle. Believe they are getting together to chat or have already chatted about Suits LA. Uh, yeah,
this is really the same showrunner as the original Suits. I mean, here's the thing. Okay, I was a watcher of Suits when it was first on.
me too.
And I liked the show because I was a big like Blue Sky viewer at the time.
This was
Um,
extremely popular for me at university. People were like, "You gotta be watching Suits." Everyone watched Suits. That's what we on
it was a
box
good
sets.
show.
Yeah,
Now,
yeah,
I dropped off of Suits at some point. I
me
don't
too.
remember when because it started to get bad, I felt. Um, then, of course, the story of Suits, it has a revival on Netflix a couple years ago. Everybody's watching Suits. It's the new kind of like The Office or Friends. Like it's just a show that people can put on and binge, and it feels good, and it's a fun show. And I feel like the Blue Sky era of what was it, TBS or whatever.
I think it was on the USA Network, wasn't
USA,
it?
sorry, that's what it was. I
Where
get them confused.
characters happen. What's
Characters
their?
welcome.
Where characters welcome. Uh-huh.
Shows like Monk and Psych and Burn Notice,
Burn
which I think
Notice. I
another one that
watched a lot of
could,
Burn Notice.
yeah, Burn Notice, fantastic. But like it just very, very much worked for Netflix. The show pops off. Clearly, they're making another version of this show so that they can like capitalize on that and sort of like try to continue and reap those rewards. This show, it again, like blue sky, right? This show, overcast. No blue sky in sight.
What did they do in terms of like, so what I think that worked about Suits so well is like, first of all, it has such a strong core group of characters that really work well to get, they're very fun to be playing off with, like Louis Litt, one of my favorite TV characters. You have Harvey Specter, like it all sort of like meshes together in this way that's very fun, while like dealing with sort of like not like case of the week, but kind of, like they're like, in these settlements, and then you have like the corporate intrigue, and you also have this super central thing of like, yeah, Mike didn't go to Harvard. You got to you got to go to Harvard if you go to the school. It has all of these elements that I think, so that's like, you have case of the week, you have an overarching story of that season, and you have this like background thing of like, is anybody going to get to figure out that Mike didn't go to Harvard? You have all of these things that are like creating tension. What does what does the show do to create any of what was so fun? Like, did they do any of that, or just like, here's new people who work at this office, or is there like an inciting thing?
There is an inciting incident, and it's definitely the most effective part of the episode, but it still feels so kind of just like,
right.
Yeah, and I don't want to spoil it either in case you want to watch, or the listeners want to watch, but like, there is one thing that you're like, okay, I'll root for you to succeed in this moment. It also is trying to do a lot of things at once. It starts in the past and it's flashing back and forth. There's like a lot of history that they're constantly referring to and that we're slowly getting dripped over the course of the first episode. There's like a brother character that they're doing a lot with, and we're being like, introduced to all of the new lawyers, and like he's got a lot of old relationships as well. And it is very, very heavily centered around this main character, Stephen Amell's character, which is another part of this too, where it was like Suits was very much an ensemble. At the very least, it was like a dueling kind of thing. Like there was the main character, the young guy, and then his mentor, and then it, over time it became both of them, and then over time it expanded even more. Whereas this one is very much just like Stephen Amell all the time. And I don't hate him in the role, but I've seen this, and I think I do agree a little bit that like he's just doesn't quite fit here. The other thing about Suits was that it was very, very charming, even though these people were sometimes very aggressive.
Louis Litt is like, I don't know how they did it, but that guy, like, he is like, you don't love him, but you grow to love it. Like, I do think there at Harvey Specter, you should hate him, and you don't hate him. You like, you want to be him. I think
they have that charm, and they Suits was like a breeding ground for like
future princesses. Oh wait, what?
for like people who make content for insecure men to be like, this is how you be an alpha. Right. And I feel like Suits LA is like a parody of that. Like there's not like, I'm sorry, it's just Stephen Amell just does not have, I'm not watching Stephen Amell and being like, I can't help but love him. I'm like, man, that guy's a jerk.
Yeah, I don't know,
He's just
really
mean all the time.
Yeah, I don't know. I watched him in Heels, and I thought not in the shoes, in a show called Heels.
Well, Heels is great, and he plays a similar kind of character in Heels, where he's a jerk all the time, but he has it there. He has it in that show, and I think it's like he just fits that kind of character a little better to me.
He's a little grittier than I think. Like, I don't know. Suits feels like glossy and wrestling. He's like a Southern wrestling guy, in Heels. So Yeah, it keeps sounding like I'm saying he's on high heels, but it's just the name of the show.
So, I'll keep an eye on Suits LA. I'm not going to watch more of it yet. But as you can see from the IMDb rating and from the stuff online so far, not super well received. I can't imagine this lasts too long unless it gets much better, very quickly.
Yeah. Okay.
However, I did watch Reacher.
You know what? I saw a lot of people being like, "Hey, new Reacher out." Like that was like what I kept seeing on like people that like, I don't know, people were just very excited for Reacher to be out, which I didn't really know. I knew it was well liked, but I kind of thought it had. I do feel like sometimes shows pop up on our radar that are like, I'm like, oh, that's not really like, I think like our wheel. Like I feel like there's like it feels a little like Jack Ryan and like, that's I know obviously the political thriller thing has come, really been present, but there's like that type of what I keep calling a dad show. There's like my dad would watch Reacher, but people who are not my dad, and most people in the world are not my dad, they were watching Reacher.
Well, I think that's for a couple of reasons. One, Alan Richardson, who's fantastic and by all accounts like a great guy. Everyone wants to root for Alan Richardson. Number two, it is much, at least, so this is the thing. Season 1, people really liked. Season 2, people did not like. Season 3, people are back to really liking it. I watched the first episode, and it's great. And here's the thing. I dropped out halfway through season 1. Didn't watch season 2. Started watching on season 3. Didn't matter. I felt perfectly... I didn't feel like I was missing anything about like what was like, here's this guy. His name is Jack Reacher, and he's really good at things. And he's got a history, but here's what he's doing right now.
Does he not play by all the rules?
Guess what? He doesn't always play by the rules.
Oh my god!
And you know what? When he proposes plans, people are like, "What? You can't do that." And he's like, "No, we can do that." And they're like, "Okay, let's do it."
Wow, who would have thought? Who would have thought? He doesn't get fired from his job. Like he gets the job done.
Well, I think at various points in he's like not officially like on the books. Like he's a nomad. He kind of wanders around helping people is kind of his deal.
He's always reaching for this, reaching for that.
Exactly. So honestly,
can you tell I haven't watched it?
Based on the first episode, I'm in. They're doing a thing. I don't want to spoil what the thing is, but it's a thing I really like. I really like the premise and structure of this thing. It's a very simple thing, but again, I don't want to spoil it. And so, I think I might actually watch season 3 of Reacher, and if it doesn't get boring, I might actually finish the season of Reacher.
Okay, very fun. I heard a very interesting article. I don't know if you've come across on your Instagram a guy named Kevin McCarthy. He's I think a Fox local like affiliate movie critic. He's great. He has a really great podcast. He interviewed him and talking about like having different directors over the course of the show. And actually this was delayed because of the writers' strike, I believe, and they had to like stop filming. And by the time they came back, they had all of this like outdoor stunty stuff that like where they were filming, it was the completely wrong time of year. So it was like supposed to be like, so I can't remember whether they're supposed to be winter or supposed to be summer, but it was the opposite. And they basically had to like do everything they were going to do indoors and then go and do everything that was outdoors. And so it completely messed up like how they filmed it. I just thought that was like so fascinating. It's a really great interview. If you can check Kevin McCarthy TV, I believe is his Instagram. He's tremendous. But I thought Alan Richardson's response to that was like, I was like, oh, this guy like super. I'm judging a book by its cover, but he's a big, beefy, gigantic dude. But I thought he had a very a nice response. I like seemed good. I would like to check out Reacher, I think.
This is Alan Richardson. This is the vibe he gives. He's a giant man. And then I just want to show you an image from episode 1 of season 3 of Jack Reacher, which I think helps explain part of the show. This is a shot from the first episode.
Whoa. That's wild. How did they fill him with helium? If you're not watching, it is a giant individual who is
even bigger man.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
Reacher Russian dolls, I would like to see.
yeah,
Really,
that's Reacher. Reacher personally was the favorite new show I watched this week.
okay.
And the second favorite one was probably A Thousand Blows. Um, I checked out the first 2 episodes of this 6-episode season. All episodes are out right now. This is the show from the guy that made
Peaky Blinders.
Peaky
My order,
Blinders.
Peaky Blinders. Yeah.
Starring
Stephen
amongst
Graham.
many others, Stephen Graham, who is phenomenal in it, from what I've seen so far. It was fine.
Oh man, that's tough.
Yeah. I mean, listen,
tough.
I think there are, like, here's the thing. I also thought Peaky Blinders was fine.
Oh.
I liked Peaky Blinders a lot at first, and then it got kind of old for me.
Oh, that's fair. That's fair. There's some like they yeah, for a show that had like 6 episode seasons, you're like, we're running through a lot of we don't got a lot of plot left. Yep.
A Thousand Blows, I think, will really work for people that are into this kind of stuff specifically. If you really like Peaky Blinders all the way through, you'll probably really like it. If you like shows like The Nick, or like other, The Nick is like a very different feeling show, but it's like this kind of like character driven. You know, another show like Black Sails, like these kinds of like gritty old timey
Period.
shows
Yeah, old
that are
timey. Yeah.
character focused.
Yeah.
That have an ensemble cast and don't really like hold punches. I think that there's definitely something to it. It's not quite for me all the time. Will I finish the show? Here's the thing. With all of this stuff coming up, I don't think I will.
I thought you were gonna say, you're like, and if this is a show for you, if you like old timey boxing, if you like to say put them up.
They do the boxing stances. They're doing this.
Hey, yeah, put them up, put them up. Yeah, that's hilarious.
So it's not like the breakout that I thought it might be, but it was fine. It was fine. And then Good Cop, Bad Cop. I also checked this one out, and it was just again just by the numbers to me. Just nothing new, nothing special. Just straight.
Big shout out to the person on, I think, Blue Sky, who was like, hey, the first thing I thought of was Bon Cop, Bad Cop. So that's 2 weeks in a row. I'm going to get a Bon Cop, Bad Cop mention on the pod. Probably will never happen ever again. But shout out to Melissa, who pointed that out. It was like, I also thought of Bon Cop, Bad Cop, this Quebec police,
good cop, bad cop with Leighton Meester and Clancy Brown and Luke Cook. Just honestly, not worth checking out with all the other stuff coming out.
I watched a movie this week.
Please.
I watched The Monkey.
Nice.
Horror movie from Oz Perkins, who did Longlegs. I liked this movie. I thought it was pretty fun. I think for me, and this is going to sound so silly for a movie that's called The Monkey, but I thought at times it was a little too silly for me. I wanted it to be a little more, like I know.
On the poster it says everyone dies, and that's effed up.
Okay, I will say a lot of people die, and they do a lot of really unique kills. I just think I think that that's the most it has going for it. I think in the movie is like the spectacle of it. The story is not. I don't even think it's a good story that I think isn't really like it's just not the strongest part of the movie. Like, it's based on a Stephen King, I think, short story. So you're already pulling pretty thin. I kind of thought there was like some stuff that I thought they were like thematically that they're doing that I don't really feel like they ever get into. But honestly, if you're just looking to watch people be horrifically killed on a big screen or at home, I highly recommend The Monkey. I wouldn't go into it expecting like, whoa, that movie is sitting with me for a while. You're just gonna be like, I did see it. They ripped a hole in his whole head. You're like, okay, yeah. So yeah, but fine.
There you go.
Yep.
Okay. Anything else before we catch up on a couple things?
I don't think anything else new.
Okay. Well, I did finish apple cider vinegar.
Okay.
Still loved it. I mean, I think it had some very strong moments toward the end. I also like I was honestly surprised after I looked it up to see how close it seemed to be to real events. There were moments where I was like, okay, so this is obviously a fictionalized version of a thing to exemplify. Oh no, she did actually go there. Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Um, so that was interesting. I think that I was hoping for something just to like really just like some kind of like elevation. I feel like I was very like, you watch the first episode, you get it. Apple cider vinegar. Like, this is, you get it, whether you like it, whether you will like it or not. And you will just get more of that throughout, I think, is pretty much what you're gonna get with apple cider vinegar. I think it's very good. I think it's worth watching. I think it does some very fun things with the way it tells its story. It has a funny joke at the end, but
Yeah, it is
I
very.
will
That's
say,
very good. Yeah, that one. The one. Yeah, yeah. Yep. The epilogue. Yeah, it's very
but
good.
I didn't like it. I didn't like the joke.
You.
'Cause I
I
don't like Googling things.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, full spoiler, I guess here because it is. It's not going to really affect the show,
Very light spoiler.
but they do all this stuff where like the characters like break the fourth wall and look at the TV and say, this is based on true-ish events or whatever, and they sometimes say more or whatever, and then like sometimes they get cut off and whatever. So the last moment is like it's supposed to be like the postscript, like the epilogue, and it's Caitlin Dever as saying like, about to give the reveal of like, and then this is what happened to her, and she like cuts herself off. She goes like, you know what, you can just Google it. And I like it because I do think like now that the show's over, I think the problem is that like people do this I do this the whole time as I'm watching something. I'm being like, oh, is that thing? Like I joke with Shannon, guys, when we would watch The Crown, that an episode of The Crown would actually take like 2 hours to watch because I constantly be like looking up on Google and then realizing I had like not been watching and have to go back and start again. So I like it. I think it's a very funny, like it's that's
I
how I
laughed.
watch TV. Yeah. But I get the point that you could want, and I do feel like so I've been thinking about this because I agree with you that something about the ending didn't quite work for me in the sense that I never really feel like, I think one thing is in the last episode, I do think they pick a thing to try and focus on as like, this is the climactic moment of the story to try and be like, and this is the moment everything sort of like the fallout of it happens. What I think is that I don't know that worked as like the climactic moment of like all of the events that happened. I feel like there could have been something else. But the other piece of this is I feel like just like overall, because of this, the way she's trying to tell the story, I think that like there isn't this like immediate and gratifying, like answer. And even to the way in which like if you look up what's happened to her, I don't think she's been told that she has to pay a bunch of money, but I don't think she's been able to pay because she just doesn't have any money. And so there kind of like isn't this thing that you can be like, and then justice was served, like in a way that I think in the way that she wants to frame the story and then the way she wants to, and I
I
mean that by Samantha Strauss. I think it's just like sometimes I feel this of like, I remember talking with Kevin Jacobs after watching Beau is Afraid. And I was like, how did you like it? He's like, no, I don't think I liked it. And I didn't like watching it, but I think that's what they wanted me to feel. So I think it's good. And I was like, yeah, I agree with that.
yeah, I think specific like, because it's one of those things where it's based on real life, so obviously there can't be like a nice neat conclusion. But I think narratively I was looking for something a little more like that would round out the story a little more. So the way they start the series is with Belle interviewing at like a PR like crisis place, management place. And like that to me was a decent framework for like an overarching narrative where like they could kind of conclude that story perhaps by the end. And I think that's maybe where they missed the mark for me, is because that storyline doesn't get like resolved like that. I mean, it does get resolved, but not in a way that feels like it just kind of gets lost amongst the episodes. And then there's a different kind of conclusion. So, I mean, not a huge criticism. I think it was a very fun show. Just like narratively, I'm always looking for
Yeah.
something. It didn't feel like an ending as much as it just felt like they ran out of stuff.
Yeah. I,
Like
I
this
think
is yeah.
for, for so the show is trying to do, I think primarily like sort of two different. One is show how this happened and then how it affected the people who like who's the fallout from this thing. And so you have this sort of like other person who was in the sort of trying to do almost very similar things as and the sort of rivalry that happened there. You have this character who is directly influenced. Her choices are made because of Belle, and you have like these characters who are like impacted by like not
That
only
was,
Belle,
I think, the
but
best part of the ending. That storyline.
totally agree. Not only impacted by Belle, but this like thing as a whole. And then you also have this way in which that she is trying to, for as much as it's probably legally like you're probably like legally have to, because you're going to use her name, have to be true-ish to the vet. You can't like I don't know how much leeway they can actually have, but I presume that she felt like she needed to be faithful to who, at least this version of Belle that she recognizes but you don't want to end up in a baby reindeer scenario, right, where you're being sued for how what you portrayed on the screen if it was wrong. And I feel like there is this like empathy that she has and she's really trying, Samantha Strauss, the creator and writer, trying to figure out why Belle would have done this and write her in a way that would explain how does someone get into a situation where they feel so alone that they lie about things to garner empathy for themselves in a way that I think then becomes tricky to like nail a like storybook ending of like, and then this person, like the justice was served, when it's like this very complicated, I think, thing. So I think that it's about as good of an ending as like she could have done, considering like all the things she's trying to sort of balance in the show. Again, I'm with you. I think it's very good. I do feel like there's like something missing from the ending that makes it like, that wrapped up,
I think she does a phenomenal job of creating that empathy while not excusing anything. And that goes for a lot of the characters, not just Belle in the show. Really, really good stuff.
Mila is promoting similar things that like that Belle is doing, and it's she's just not lying about having actually been diagnosed with cancer. I think it's really interesting. It's actually that type of empathy for like is actually a thing that I wish like we had more of in our system, where it's like you can both realize that people do bad things, acknowledge that they did a bad thing and the thing that they shouldn't have done, and also understand why people have made, and the more that we can actually understand why people make those decisions actually makes our society a little bit. So I really just love like the viewpoint she came at, Samantha Strauss did come at the show, which is I think why I like vibed with it so much.
Yeah. Okay. I also went back and finished American Primeval. I watched a couple episodes of that when it
Just a
first
light little
dropped.
ending, just a light little, just easy to watch show, American Primeval.
I really liked it when it started.
Yeah.
I did not like the ending. I did not care for it. I really felt like it was very lazy.
It's pretty, yeah.
And I felt like it just didn't have the courage to really say anything. And really just kind of like let go of all of its strands, but in a way that made it feel gutsy, but I didn't feel like it actually was. That was my take on the American Primeval ending. Didn't care for it. Didn't think it was worth watching all the way through personally.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I know somebody else who watched it kind of felt the same. With like, I had such high hopes, and then it just is like, that's what you did at the end. So
yeah.
Yeah.
I also went through and watched all of Mo. Pretty sure I haven't talked about this yet.
not finishing it. We've talked about the show a couple times, but not really about having watched a bunch of it. So
I watched all first and second season. Not a ton to say about it beyond the fact that it is just very good. And in particular, the second season goes even deeper into Palestinian culture. And actually, I don't think it's like too big of a spoiler to say that they go to Palestine in an episode. And so some very, very good stuff from Mo, I would say. Definitely worth checking out. And then another one, Common Side Effects. I jumped onto. This is the show that is by the same people that did what's it called? Scavenger's Reign. I can never remember the name of that.
Yeah.
Very different vibe, I would say, even though the images look similar.
Yeah.
But very strange in a different way. I don't like it as much as Scavenger's Reign personally, but a lot of people are really loving this. A lot of people are like super into it. In fact, I would say it seems to be attracting like a wider fan base even than Scavenger's Reign perhaps did. But to me, it's a little more conventional in terms of storyline for animation. And I really love the abstract nature of Scavenger's Reign, even though that's not usually my thing. But people are really loving it. So
Yeah, I haven't heard much about this, but that's good. I mean, sometimes that happens. There's I mean, the creator of Archer had a show before they did Archer that I loved and was like my brother
oh
and
yeah,
I still quote. It's called Frisky Dingo. We quote it
yeah.
literally all the time. And you know that show like ended up getting canceled. Gets canceled cliffhanger. Archer is a super successful show that like I love, but I don't love as much as like Frisky Dingo was really like so in my wheelhouse. That sometimes this happens of like the first thing you know they got a shot didn't quite kick off and they come back with something else and it does. So it's interesting.
Mm-hmm. Speaking of animation, though, Pantheon season 2 is coming to Netflix. I talked about season 1 when it dropped on Netflix. It did not pop off. I've seen a little more people talking about Pantheon season 2. It's being recommended heavily to me on Netflix, even though I haven't watched it on Netflix because I watched it prior to that. But it seems to know that I would like it because I did like it. I'm curious. I thought Pantheon season 2 was even stronger than season 1. In fact, it was just very, very good overall. Very good ending and conclusion to the story. And so I'm curious again to see if this moves the needle at all for Pantheon, brings it a little more mainstream. Not sure, but definitely would recommend it if you're over on Netflix and you're looking for something to watch, which you're probably not because there's a lot of things happening right now.
It is a great cat. It is a great voice cast. I remember
Oh yeah,
looking at this last time where it's like Aaron Eckhart and Scoot McNairy and Corey Stoll. Yeah, it's sort of Ron Livingston. It's filled with these really good actors. Daniel Day Kim.
yeah. And then I also saw Freerun, the anime that we talked about a little while ago.
I kept seeing I could have gone to see the second one, but then I was like, oh, I feel like I should watch the first one before I see the second one. So I didn't end up going to the theater to see it, but it's playing in Toronto.
Freerun is in theaters.
Oh, Freerun? No, I'm thinking of the one that broke the Chinese box office record.
Oh, yes, Ninja.
Ninja, sorry.
You could probably watch the second one without seeing the first one, I would imagine, but you can also watch the first one fairly easily, I think.
Yeah, I know. Then it was just like it's just figure it
out. But Freerun is an anime that blew up in Japan. Its first season did very, very well. It's the like fantasy show about like what happens after the big journey, especially in regards to this immortal elf who sort of has to like watch her friends die. So it's a bit sad at times, but sort of like, you know, if you're used to watching anime and being a little bit like turned off by, you know, all of the similar tropes that you see, this is a bit of a different take, a bit of a more serious take, and something that I think could be more mainstream. And it seems to be dropping on Netflix soon. So interested to see if there's any sort of blow up here.
If you're an anime fan, Robert Pattinson recently at the Berlin Film Festival was talking about how he got inspiration for his characters in Mickey 17, the Bong Joon-ho movie that's coming out. And he goes on a long tirade about how much he pulled from anime, which I was like very, because you wouldn't think of this movie like, yeah, it's like a science fiction comedy. You wouldn't think it's like pulling, but he talks, it's quite fascinating. And it's just kind of like, you know, when you like watch someone who's like, you know, kind of gushing about something they love. And so Robert Pattinson just like geeking out over anime and how it inspired his character work is very good. Check it out. It's very good. Berlin Film Festival. Yeah.
All right. Okay. That's about what I have. We are pretty deep into this. There are actually a lot of shows coming up.
The one thing that we haven't mentioned that people are checking out is 1923, I believe, premiered over the weekend, which is the second season, which is the Woody Harrelson show. He went viral at the
Harrison Ford.
Why did I say Woody Harrelson? I watched the movie with Woody Harrelson last week.
There is a movie coming up with Woody Harrelson.
I've seen. Maybe I'm allowed to talk. I saw it at Secret Movie Club. I think I'm okay. But they were like, if you're a film critic, you're not allowed to say anything. And I was like, that's not fair. Everyone else can say something about it. Yeah. Anyway, 1923. If people, I have like haven't checked out a lot of the other Yellowstone stuff outside of like Yellowstone, but I thought people like this one. I think I don't know if that's
I think so.
but yeah.
Yeah, there are a bunch of shows coming up. None of them like stood out to me deeply, and there's a lot of shows. So I don't think we will like run through the list. But if anything does end up standing out, we'll talk about it next week. But as we said before, there's a lot of stuff coming up very soon, both shows and there's some movies coming out soon as well. So stay tuned for all of that, of course. And anything else, Grace?
No, not for me. We went a little longer today, but there's a lot to talk about. It's a good season of TV right now.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that is what we have for you then this week on the Tastemakers. We'll be back next week to talk about anything that came out this week, comes out this week, as well as catching up on other things and talking about other news things and all of that stuff. So stay tuned for it.
We should
Thank you.
next week. I'll try to catch up on the Pitt. And if we have,
Right.
there's a lot coming out, but maybe next week we might end up doing a little bit of like a spoiler section at the end. If people are interested in that, feels like the one of the bigger shows right now is the Pitt, not being covered here regularly on We Know Scripted TV. So perhaps we'll dive in a little spoilery on the Pitt next week. I'll make my best effort to catch up. We'll be a little over halfway through the season.
Yeah. Pitt's still going strong. In fact, stronger than ever, I would say. Probably my favorite episode so far was this week's episode. So
there you go.
Good stuff from the Pitt. Stay tuned for that. And make sure you subscribe to the We Know Scripted TV feed. Make sure you're watching the YouTube version of this if you want the visuals, which I think are very helpful. And we will see all of you next time.